Hi everyone, I'm not Lily, this is Lily. I am talking to Lily today because we're going to talk about complicated parents and cults, just to kind of throw something else in. So I have written a book called The Last Days, which is out in July, about growing up in a cult. And Lily and I bonded because we both have the unusual situation of having parents who thought it was a really remarkable idea to join a cult. So that's what we're here to talk about. Lily's book is absolutely incredible. This book here, Sins of My Father. It's a brilliant book, and it is out on the 17th of March, but there are copies for sale over there should anybody want to buy it in advance and read it before all the press comes out. So Lily and I are just going to kick things off by having a little chat, really. And we are going to focus on her father, who was really, I suppose you would call him the errant parent in your kind of parenting situation. So you deal very beautifully with the father-daughter relationship in your book, and particularly a complicated one. So when you were young, your father left the family home to join the Sannyasin cult, and he went off to India. What do you think kind of prompted that decision that he made to kind of up sticks and go culturally?
Thank you, Ali. Just to give you a little bit of background, some of you may be aware of the Sannyasin cult, which was around a lot in the 70s and 80s. The people, they were called Sannyasins, who were the disciples, and they were renowned in North London particularly, but all over Europe and the world, for wearing the colours of the sunset, so oranges and reds and purples. There was a big drive, particularly in the 70s and 80s, with a sort of revived interest in Eastern religion. The Beatles obviously were also following their Maharishi or their guru. And my dad was one of these, what I might call the wandering tribe, who decided that normal life, mortgages, nuclear family was not really for him. And he wanted to experiment in transcendence and meditation, looking at alternative ways of being. I, like Sonia, was raised in Zone 1 in Islington, actually, ended up in Hackney, like Sonia also, but also worked at Time Out, so that's kind of weird. But, a little bit older than Sonia, so this was happening in the 70s. My dad joined the religious cult when I was 6. Came home from India, having disappeared for 6 months. He was still married to my mum, having disappeared for 6 months, didn't tell us where he had gone. So we had no idea where he was. And he came back dressed in an Elise tracksuit. Yeah, I don't know if you know about Elise. It's still quite trendy. Purple with gaiters and sort of plastic patches on the elbows. And this mala, which was a necklace around his neck, which had a picture of his guru. But the shocking thing for me and my brother, I was 6 and my brother was 8, was that he told us that he had been reborn and that he was no longer our father. So we were slightly perplexed by this. And the book, this is the result, which is, 40 years or so of me kind of trying to work out why this man did this, is me really trying to work out what that was about for him. So yes, it was very much of its time, I suppose, that there was a culture around at that time, a rebellion against the post-war generation of their parents and mundanity, and trying, experimenting. But it was not a very comfortable world for those who were left behind, and also not very comfortable for those kids who got dragged along by their parents as well.
Because you speak quite a lot about that in the book, but your kind of position, I suppose, I don't want to say it was unique because it's very unusual, but you weren't quite inside the cult, but also you weren't quite outside the cult. And I kind of observed as I was reading the book that at times you are participating in your life and at times you're kind of stepping back and watching your life as well as you're writing the book. So how was it to kind of grow up with that sort of inside-outside perspective?
Yeah, I think looking back now, I see that I was very lucky in that I had a conventional life, and I had a mother who was very devoted to me and my brother, and acted her hardest to create a very sort of normal life for us. But at the time, of course, I loved my dad. My dad was incredibly charismatic. He was beautiful, he was tall, he was handsome, he was very sexy. One of the reasons that he joined this cult, which became known as the sex cult, was that it was all about free love and free sex. My dad was a philanderer in his marriage to my mum, regardless of the fact that he really loved her. And so he was pursuing something that he needed to have an outlet for that. But he was always also very charismatic. So I spent a lot of my childhood wanting to be around him. I wanted to be a sannyasin. I wanted to wear red and orange. I wanted to have a mala. I wanted to change my name. But actually, looking back now, I see I was incredibly lucky. But it was very confusing. So I would go and spend my weekends and my holidays with him in various communes and in his homes around the world. He was always moving. And then return to my sort of normal life and have to adapt to school and stuff, which was hard.
And you speak so much in the book as well. Like, you spend so much time trying to work your dad out. You're never sort of, you're never judgmental of him. You're never kind of acting as the person who's sort of saying, oh my God, he shouldn't have done this. You're really just telling us what he's doing. But you really examine where he came from as well, not just where you came from. So you examine his schooling. I was particularly interested in that he went to boarding school was he 8 when he was sent
7.
off?
He was 7. So prep boarding school in the 1950s, as you probably can imagine, was not a nice environment at the age of 7. So he was left abandoned, felt very abandoned by that. And I think he told me that he never forgave his parents for leaving him on that step. So that kind of transition, the traumatic transition repeats itself in my book, of him being drawn to the community, the kind of institution, I suppose, which is what a cult can become. But also, it was something that made him very unhappy. So I think there was a sense of a kind of lack of love for himself. So he was always looking elsewhere. He ended up an addict and died of alcoholism, which was very tragic, which again was another reason why I kind of felt I needed to try and answer or try and work out some of the questions around his life and his choices.
Which you do so beautifully, I think. But you also manage so well to inhabit your mother as well. So you're very much looking at your father. But also, when we have these stories of cults, we tend to sort of focus on the people who go to the cult. And maybe in a way we sort of glorify them because it's something that's so out with our kind of everyday experience. But you very much focus on the impact that it has on the people who are left behind and your mother. So how was it to kind of go into that space as well?
Yeah, I'm a writer, and I've written since a very young age, and I was a novelist before I wrote this book. And my mum used to get really annoyed with me because I always focused on my dad, and she was just like, for God's sakes, he was never there. He was the absent man. He did absolutely nothing, and yet you keep on sort of immortalising him through your work. And actually, this book, there was a very important process in writing this book where I invited her into the process of I had to, because I was writing her story as well as his. And we spoke a lot about her history, about her past, about the good things as well as the bad things. And she was very much part of that. So what we have now, is very much, it's a homage to her as well for being such an amazing mother. She was a writer as well, and always, she worked from home. And that was my memory of her, was that she was constant. So yeah, she was amazing. But she never ever let her fear of the influence of this cult sort of get in the way of me and my brother developing our own relationship with our father, even though she really instinctively knew it was not a safe place for us. And it was not a safe place for us. I won't go into details here because we have children, but it was really not a safe place for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the book deals so beautifully with kind of the inner mechanisms of what's happening and how much at risk you are. I think reading it as a parent was just completely mind-blowing to think that this was happening, and this was happening in the UK as well. I think we often think of sannyasins and kind of these sort of outlying cults as being in India or being somewhere else, but they brought it back here. Yeah. So it was something that was very much. Now, you talk about being a kid and wanting to be one of the other children. Did that ever impact on your mom? Did you ever communicate that with her at the time?
I think as children we don't tend to communicate these things. I think we're so in the present moment, aren't we, that we just sort of we deal with it. I mean, she definitely knew of my longing to be more of a part of his life, but No, I think I probably didn't communicate with her, and I think her job was just to really kind of maintain that constancy of security of home.
And then, obviously, you've told your dad's story and it's written down. You've told your mum's story as well. Your dad's dead. How does your mum find the fact that you've kind of gone and aired the family laundry?
Yeah, well, that's always the challenge when you're writing memoirs, that you affect so many other people's lives. And, I mean, as I say, I did invite her into the process of that. And so she feels that there's enough distance for her to be okay with that, although she's already getting feedback from some of her friends who have read proof copies and sort of like, how could you have tolerated this man? And I think it's like when you're actually sort of faced with your private life being read by other people, it's quite a challenging thing. But she's been really supportive of me doing this, and yeah, it's a complex thing when you write memoir, for sure.
Yeah, and the book's very much, your mum wasn't kind of tolerating him for particularly long, but it's these far-reaching effects that people who are in other people's lives for a relatively short amount of time can have as well. Yeah. So I'm always fascinated, I think, because I've written memoir as well, by the kind of process that how do you go about piecing together a life and turning it into story as well, because it's one thing to have a life and it's another thing to make it engaging to the reader. So how did you go about that?
Well, it took me a long time to write, which I think really helps when it's a very personal subject matter. So one of the reasons I started writing this book was that I went through a divorce with my husband, and we loved each other very much, but I couldn't make it work, and I had to face the fact that I had unprocessed stuff that I had to deal with. So I felt quite compelled to write this out, and also my father had died very tragically of alcoholism. So it came out in bursts and sort of quite an urgency initially, and I got a lot of essays published, personal essays published of that material. And then I realized actually that there was a book. And so that process of sort of narrativizing my life definitely took a lot of drafts and getting feedback and people reading it for me to be able to objectify it. And yeah, that was hugely important, because I think you can be too close to your material as a memoirist, even as a fiction writer. So that distance, I think, has been really important. And also I did a lot of research. So this book is part of a PhD, and it has a lot of research in it about cults, about alcoholism, about addiction. So I was doing a lot of reading around my subject as well, and I think that also helps you to sort of distance yourself from it.
And almost kind of to contextualize it as well, that it's a story that fits within a particular cultural moment as well, I suppose, that people were looking for something else. Do you think that kind of cults still have the same pull that they once had, or do you think are we post-cult?
I think we are full of cults. I mean, particularly in America, aren't we? That, there's so much cultish behavior that still happens. It may be that we don't really recognize it as that, and it may be that we need to step outside of it to see it, because one of the determining factors of cults is that secrecy, it's the closed doors, it's that, you think that when you're in it, that's your reality. And actually, when you step out, you realize that this is a distortion of reality. It's not actually real and it's not healthy. So I think we are still very much in a culture of cults, maybe even more so in places like America. I mean, the cult of Trump is the perfect example.
I wonder if we've kind of almost mainstreamed cults, that they're sort of, it's acceptable, we've got them on our phone, we've got people following us, all this kind of cult language has just made its way into our vernacular that we use as well.
Definitely.
But it's been, obviously, it's not published yet, it's very close to publication, but you've had some brilliant responses to it so far. I know that Amy Liptrot, whose book is just out last week actually, said that she was completely obsessed with it. So how does it feel to take your story and then see that other people are kind of reading into it and taking it on as theirs?
It's hugely exciting, totally frightening and nerve-wracking, and I'm sort of feel like I'm on the precipice about to jump off the edge. But it's great. There's been a lot of real interest, a lot of really good reviews already from early readers, and it's amazing to be able to gift. It sort of feels like a sort of generous gift. You're sort of gifting part of your life. I mean, memoir is not your life; it's part of your life. You've created a story from it. You're gifting it to other people, to readers, to take what they want from it, and you know, that's an amazing privilege. So I'm very excited to see how the general public kind of takes it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably a really good point to kind of throw it open to the audience as well, if anyone has any questions.